Welcome to Always Real Talk 2020. I'm Kwame Brown. In the building, we have, well, not the building, but clearly on our live studio, we have Josh Lopez. That's right, Josh Lopez is the Democratic political operative and strategist. Josh, welcome back to Always Real Talk.
Hey Kwame, thanks for having me back on. Always happy to be here, and always happy to be on Always Real Talk.
Hey, man, well, hey, good to have you on. Let's jump right into it, right? I want to go right into the local election right here in Washington, D.C. We're looking at the numbers. These numbers could change, but in 2016, there were about 478,000 registered voters in D.C. And in 2020, there were 517,000, a little bit over 517,000 voters in D.C. In 2016, there were about 310, 315,000 people that voted. And in this election, which is the most energized election, well, I guess last time was an energized election too, you have close to about 305,000 people. We know the votes haven't come in yet, but clearly there's been somewhat of a decrease in the number of people energized and participating in the political process and voting. What is your thoughts on that? Why do you think that is?
I mean, there's probably a few different factors. We still need to get the certified results to see what the total number was of folks who voted in the city. But look, there was a net loss of 15,000 residents in DC earlier this year. I think when the pandemic first started. So I don't think we'll know what the exact number is until we get that certified result from Board of Elections.
Okay. Well, I want to, and that's fair. We'll get that. Some people might have, mailed their stuff in and they hadn't, it's just getting there now and then getting over to the Board of Elections. Clearly, could be the case. I don't know if it's going to be 10,000 or 15,000 or 20,000, but clearly we see some sort of drop. And I'm not saying a big drop and everything's falling off off the earth. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying it seems to be somewhat a drop in elections and people coming out and voting. I want to jump right into a race today. Everyone's talking about. I know the national election is going on, but this at-large race was a shocker. You have 20-something people running for the at-large. And at-large, you can vote for two people. That means you can vote for two. It could be a Democrat, it could be independent, it could be a Republican. You can vote for two. Didn't make a difference. That's what happens. In D.C., normally the Democratic nominee is favored, right? And they typically get all the votes, and then the second vote goes to the second at-large member. You even saw a big drop in those numbers. Robert White got over 200 and something thousand votes in 2016, and then in 2020, he got 114,000 votes. So you see it was a big drop versus how many people was in the race last time versus how many people is in the race of this time. But the big shocker is that we had her on the show, Christine Henderson. She came on the show early when she first started running, and we was talking to candidates. And when I interviewed her and she was on with us, I was very, very impressed with her. I said, wow, if people hear her, she's gonna shock the world. And clearly that happened. People laughed at me. It was like, nah. I said, look, I've talked to her. I've interviewed her. I paid attention to her, and she seems to be someone that people kind of like took for granted. The Washington Post endorsed her, and then people thought that was going to be the kiss of death. Most people say you get the Washington Post endorsement, oh man, you probably it's going to be bad in this election cycle to kind of pull something off. But look, you and I know that Ed Lazier was the favorite to win this race. Everyone in the city was saying Ed Lazier's got this, and everyone was chasing Ed Lazier. Some people called him the boy wonder. What happened to Ed Lazier in this race, in your opinion?
Well, I think congratulations are in order for Robert White, who was the Democratic nominee, and political newcomer Christina Henderson, who ran a great campaign. Managed to stay out of the mudslinging contest amongst some of the male candidates. And I think, folks looked at her qualifications, her record, her positions on stances, and, certainly, I think some good endorsements coming her way from the Post and also from the outgoing council member, David Grosso, certainly worked in her favor. But she ran a great campaign. She had some, I think, very, very good mailers that were convincing. And I think they did the job. She got over, the hill, stayed out of the fight that was taking place amongst some of the other candidates, and she had a strong victory. So congratulations to Council Member Robert White and Council Member elect Henderson. But you
Absolutely.
did talk about Ed Lazier, and so Ed
Well,
Lazier was a early.
I'm gonna get back to Ed in a second. We'll get
Sure,
back to
sure.
Ed in a second because you said something that I think we just need to hit on, and that is, and people start to figure this out a little bit down the road, is that Christina Henderson is very, very accomplished and very, very brings an experience to the table. She's worked on the Hill on the legislative side. She's negotiated with Republican senators and Democratic senators, and you and I know with Senator Chuck Schumer and others, it's a battle going on up there. She worked for Councilmember David Grosso, understanding legislation. She worked at DCPS. She worked at New York's school cities. That's why she talks about schools all the time. But I think she ran what I consider a very strategic campaign. She kind of kept her head down, and it was more targeted, right? And what I mean by target is that my daughter, who's a first-time voter in the District of Columbia, the only piece of mail she received was from Christina Henderson.
Mm-hmm.
And when she received that piece of mail from Christine Henderson, because mail comes to the house all the time, right? So she comes in and I give her a piece of mail. And she's thinking, oh, Dad's just trying to give me a piece of campaign literature, right? And then she looks at it and she sees her name on it. She's like, yes, yes. And she goes, this is the only person that sent me a piece of literature. Then she started to read it. But I guess my point was there are a lot of new voters that, a lot of people just didn't touch and didn't reach out to them. And once she saw what she offered and where she was trying to go, I think the combination of those two was clear. Ed Lazier. Let's talk about Ed Lazier because Ed Lazier had the Attorney General Carl Racine endorsed him. At-large council member Alyssa Silverman endorsed him. It seems like all the unions endorsed him. It seems like the Sierra Club endorsed him. It seemed like every progressive organization not only endorsed him, but sent out literature. I got it to my house. I know a lot of people got literature at their house. The Greater Washingtons supported him. I think DCS has supported him. He had the Jews for Justice that supported him. He had a laundry list of people that supported him. What happened?
You're correct. I mean, he had massive support in terms of visibility. Ran a highly visible campaign, especially on social media. He had a very effective ground team, putting the signs up all over the city. But I think DC voters are rejecting that far left, progressive ideology that's had a good run over the last few years. But folks seem to want a more measured, pragmatic is a word that people throw out there a lot. DC Council, I think this election, really shows that that's what people wanted. Ed kind of tripped up towards the end with, his doubling down on support of an organization that was protesting outside of Anita Bonds' house at midnight. That created a backlash in itself. He was out there with protesters who were, throwing bricks at a police station. I think at the end, folks looked at his ideology and his approach as a little bit too extremist. And there was an outright rejection of him. I mean, you look at the top 5 candidates in this race, he finished 5th.
Well, there are some out there, and this is always real talk, so we got to keep it real. This is not Ed Lazier's first trip to the rodeo. He ran for chairman of the council against Council Member Mendelson, and I remember there are a lot of people on the streets that were saying that black people didn't vote for Ed Lazier, and this was somewhat of a race issue. They didn't vote for Ed Lazier. But then I looked down at this impressive group of endorsements, and it's a very diverse group. Progressive, I mean, I got you, they're progressive, but they're very diverse in terms of racial folks that were out there supporting Ed Lazier. Do you think it was a race thing this time for Ed, or you think that it was just people were not interested in the policies in terms of what he was actually bringing to the table?
Yeah, I think it's both. If you look at the results in this election, he did poorly east of the river again, in Ward 7 and 8. His numbers were dismal. He didn't do well in Ward 5 where he lives. So I think there's just a rejection of, one, the ideology and the far left progressive perspective on politics. But then it's a, if you look at just a common issue with that progressive wing, they just can't seem to make strong inroads in the Black community and the Latino community east of the river, and we saw that again with not only the council race but some other races, some other competitive races, even with the school board race.
Oh, that was, I mean, that was a good point. You talk about race and did race play an issue, but look, we're looking at the numbers, and the numbers don't lie. It seems to me that Ed Lazier did not win in any ward of the city. In Ward 1, which is a very progressive ward, you and I know Ward 1 seems to be pretty progressive. Most people think if you're in Ward 1, you're progressive, you're going to vote progressive ways, but that's not what residents want. Christina Henderson got 24% of the vote, and Ed Lazier got 17. And clearly, she was not to the left. She was kind of like in the middle, a pragmatist. Then Ward 2, now we would expect Ward 2 would not be there for Ed, and Christina got 18, Ed got 12. But then I want to go over to wards what people consider progressive wards, and this is what the progressives say, Ward 6. In Ward 6, he didn't win either. Christina got 17% and he got 13%. And then I want to go to Ward 5. And this, the story always says if you can't win where you live, the ward you live, then you really don't deserve to be on the council if you're running at large, right? Everyone should win at home. If you can't win your neighborhood and your neighbors don't want you, that's probably a problem. And in Ward 5, she got 14% and Ed got only 10% of the vote where he lives in the area that's progressive. So I just want to note that, where the progressive areas of the city, he never came in first, and in some places barely came in second. Well, third, pretty much, because Robert White was number one in every single one of those areas.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
I think this really highlights the weakness of this progressive wing in DC politics. They've dominated the discourse over the last few years, but they've turned a lot of people off with negative attacks, constantly, speaking ill of other people who don't agree with them all the time. And in this election cycle, you had options, you had good options. And for, a group that constantly preaches, Black and brown equity, which is a line they love to use, this time, there was an opportunity to elevate Black and brown voices. And I think DC residents, they looked at the qualifications, they looked at the issues, and they went with someone that represented that constituency. And Ed doesn't come from that constituency. He speaks about it a lot, but look, it backfired on him. I think that progressive wing needs to go back to the drawing board and re-strategize on how they're going to win over the next couple of years.
Yeah, well, I think that when you start talking about the progressive wing of the party, because progressive, and it's how it's defined, right? There's a lot of issues that some may consider progressive that others don't. There's some that issues that I know that I support that people say that's kind of progressive, and then there's some things that I don't support, right? And so I think that you're right. I think that people have started to push so far left, thinking that you need to be left because it's popular, because nationally we had Bernie Sanders and everyone talking about all of this different stuff, and they got caught up, and that's where they want to be. And the residents of the District of Columbia clearly said no, right?
Yeah,
They
and I
had a
use the
choice.
term progressive loosely,
Right.
but you're right. There's an extreme left, division and group within the progressive movement, if you want to use that word, in DC politics, and I think there was just an outright rejection of an extreme approach where there's no room for compromise, there's no middle ground. It's either their way or Norway, and folks weren't going with that. They wanted someone who can, get up on the council, work with their colleagues, work with the mayor's office, and at the end of the day, do what's right for the residents of the District of Columbia.
Right. Well, I want to move straight on just from a time perspective. Marcus Goodwin. Now, Marcus Goodwin, when he first ran, in 2 4 years ago, 2 years ago when he ran,
Mm-hmm.
before he became president or after he became president, Young Democrats, I can't remember which one because time just like whoop. But, I was out there. I thought he was a guy with a bright future. He was running against Anita Bonds. Anita Bonds, great individual. Everyone knows Anita. She's been around. I've known her since I was 7, 8, 9 years old, right? Thought he had a chance, then wasn't able to pull it off, and then he runs again, and he comes in fourth place. After spending close to $400,000, is his political career over in Washington D.C.?
I think he's still young enough, to give it another shot if that's what he chooses to do in the future. There was probably a bit of, him and Vincent Orange probably went after the same constituency in many respects. And look, they both came up short. But look, if you look at the political landscape, everyone that ran in the race, he's probably the youngest person up there.
Yeah.
And so, if he wishes to go at it again, he may have a future if that's what he chooses to do. But
Well,
certainly, look, he did a good job raising money. He didn't participate in the public financing program, which, as you know, matches every dollar you raise times five. So he, did an impressive fundraising operation, but he came up short again. And
yeah.
so, I really have to look at the numbers. But I think there was a bit of an overlap with him and Vincent Orange. And they both may have undermined each other in this one.
Well, I mean, I think there's a pattern of one never supporting any young person that gets in the race. So what you have, especially in the District of Columbia, when someone young gets in the race, it's always someone else that gets in and says, you shouldn't have it, I should have it, right? And clearly that looks like what took place in that particular election. It'd
Yeah, I
be
mean,
nice to,
if you look at the messaging, right? Both him and Vincent Orange ran on a pro business platform, and so they may have just appealed to the same constituency. And you've got to think, DC is overwhelmingly Democrat. So the bulk of votes went to Councilmember Robert White, and then folks were probably thinking, hedging their bets on either Vincent Orange or Marcus Goodwin,
yeah, well, I
and
mean, the numbers itself just is tells a different story, right? Marcus was competitive in 3 and 1 and 2 and 7 and 8, where others was only competitive in 5, 7, and 8, right? So in the areas of 5, 7, 8, that's where you saw the subtraction, and that's because one got in the race and then the other decided it was going to get in the race, and we have a generational problem in the District of Columbia. It's always real talk. And so what happens is instead of allowing the next generation to step up to the table to participate, some people just can't allow that. They can't do it. They'd rather just go down in flames, and
Yeah, yeah. I
and
mean,
that
we
seems to
certainly
be
have a issue
well.
in the city with folks of strong name recognition who've been in politics for a very long time, not passing the baton,
Well, I
and
mean, and,
it's not
and
exclusive to this race.
the fact that folks still support it and then cry about how come we don't have more young people getting involved in the political process. Those are the ones that should be rethinking how they think.
But
And so
you're
I
right,
keep it I
Kwame. But
keep it real. I don't sugarcoat nothing. Clearly,
I'll say this though. I'll say this with just this year. I mean, if you look at Janice Lewis, she's young. Brooke Pinto is young. Christina Henderson is young. So the city did elect three young women to get on the council. So that may be true in some parts of the city, but not the whole city.
oh,
You look at
I'm
Ward 2, Ward 4, and even this at-large race. Voters did send some young people up to the council. That we can celebrate that. It's a huge accomplishment.
oh, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. But Christina Henderson went and took it, right? That's what she did. She got out there, she ran. She didn't go ask people, will you please support me, blah, blah, blah. She got out there, she campaigned, she said, this who we are, and she took it, right? She didn't have the entire establishment behind her. Janice Lewis George, I mean, I remember her when she was the youth YMCA mayor. I remember speaking and I saw this young lady and I was like, wow, she's a fire. She was on fire then, right? But I didn't know, like,
Yeah,
look up and now this person's running for council, right? But she ran, she got out there against all odds to a certain degree, right? It takes a lot to run against incumbents.
absolutely.
And she did that and she won. Pinto, came out of nowhere. But what did she do? She got out there, she ran. People told her, hey, you shouldn't do it. People called, each one of them, other people called and asked them to get out the race. And they didn't do it, they stayed the course.
And
That's what I
and
consider.
look, and they've and we've elected one, there are now three black women on the council versus one, which is, I think huge gain, great for the city. It's a majority black council again, the first time since 2012, which I think is great. We live in a majority black city. Our political representation should also reflect that. You look at the year in totality. I think DC voters, sent a strong message. They wanted more women representation, and they wanted more black representation on the DC council, and that's
Well,
what we got.
well, I, I'll say this. It's whether you're black or you're brown or you're not black, and we're not even talking about the two Hispanic and Latinos that got on that ran. I mean, Garcia and Monica, they both, ran. Grass saw her stuff all over the place. Someone was always riding around with a horn and beeping and saying her name. I saw her probably more outside than I saw any other candidate in terms of their stuff going around the city. But
Right. And she
when
did
it
good.
comes,
She got over 11,000 votes as well. And for
yeah,
someone who's never run for office, you alluded to it, the Latino community in DC, we have never had a representative on the DC council, which is, insane, when you talk about how inclusive our city is. So we're hopeful and we're optimistic that that'll change in the next election cycle. It's long overdue.
absolutely. And then, but I want to get back to your point in terms of, some people will say, like you said, hey, now you have, more African Americans on the council, the majority African Americans on the council. I just want to say something that my father used to always tell me, hey, that looks good, that sounds good, but it'd be interesting to see how they move, how they operate, and how they, deal with the issues that people are frustrated about in the city. And if they
Hmm.
don't do that, then it's just another person on the council. And so I'm hoping that all of them have talked the talk, they've walked the walk, and let's see if they deliver when they get down to the Wilson
Absolutely.
Building.
And look,
So
I'm optimistic. You look at, those, three incredible women that I just named, they have, different perspectives, different ideas. But, all three of them are coming to the table, I think ready to work, ready to do what's right for the city. And they're young. And so I'm always hopeful and optimistic when I see young people holding elected
absolutely.
office.
I like all three of them. I think they all got some energy, and I think they're gonna give them hell when they get down there. That's what I think is gonna happen. They gonna give them hell, and it's gonna be fun to watch. I mean, people might start watching Channel 13 again. You never know, right? Well, hey, Josh, thanks
Absolutely.
for stopping by, man. It's always good to see you. Tell the family hello.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
All right, great.
I'll let
Well,
my mom know you send your greetings. She's always a big fan of you and always real talk. So thanks again for having me, Kwame. Appreciate the time to get on here and share some perspective.
hey, always, man. We'll get you back when things get rolling. We'll get you back to see where things are. One thing about you, I know that you don't shy away from, fighting for the people and speaking your mind on things that you think are important. So I'm sure, as things go on, we'll come back and see where things are. So if it's always real talk, it's going to be real.